Welcome back everyone to the Sustainable Agriculture stream sponsored by Gallagher. Firstly, I just wanted to say that I'm still buzzing from the awards ceremony last night. What an incredible, inspiring lineup of finalists. A huge congratulations to all the finalists. Your dedication to this great country is absolute. Especially a big congratulations to Andrew Stewart for taking out the 2021 Bob Hawke Award. Loved hearing the crying kids in the background while he thanked all the people who supported him. Themes that resonated with me from last night's awards are diversity, connection, and humility. These themes were carried through yesterday's presentations, and today is definitely going to be no exception. So with this in mind, before I introduce the next speaker, can I remind you all again, throughout the presentation, post your questions through the Pigeonhole chat. We'll get to those at the end of each session. If you like a question someone has asked, you can like them in the chat, and that gets bumped up. Okay, so with that in mind, let's kick off with our first speaker today. With the advent of significant rainfall since La Nina started to develop in the mid-20s, multi-year rainfall deficiencies still remain since the 2017-19 drought conditions. With the recent above-average levels of rainfall, it's easy to go back to business as usual and forget to plan for what the future may hold. Jennifer Laffin from New South Wales Department of Primary Industries will outline the key findings on how farmers are preparing for future uncertainty around droughts. A bit of a cautionary tale by the sounds of it. Thanks, Jennifer. Over to you.
Thanks, Luke. Yes, at Taucal, we thought exactly what you think. What you just said, that when it starts to rain, people get on with business and get on with their production. And a lot of good ideas that people had during the drought or coming up to the drought can just get lost. And so we thought we should document the ideas that farmers had, and we saw some very useful information and put it all together. And in this presentation, I'd like to tell you about where I went, where these farmers were, show you some of the images of what they were saying, tell you about the common message that came through, and tell you where you can find out more about what they say, because I can't tell you the whole lot in this presentation. So I went into every climate zone in New South Wales and also went up into Queensland to the Darling Downs, Cunnamulla and Longreach, so that we could get a broad view of how the drought was affecting all those people and the ideas that people in different climate zones had for how they would prepare for drought next time. Here are some of the people that I interviewed. You see that some of them are young, some of them not so young, and a mix of men and women, and they're also a broad mix of enterprises. So we had a mix of climate zones and a mix of enterprises and a mix of people. The interesting thing was that many of the things they said were common throughout. The main themes we looked at, or the themes that emerged, were about managing finances, managing water security, what to do about livestock, what you do about cropping or planning for cropping, national resource management and the challenges there, and the very important theme of personal preparation, staying sane throughout the whole thing. But out of all that, I've picked one basic message that underlined all those things, and that was maintaining ground cover. Maintaining ground cover affected every theme, and it also was emphasised by every farmer that I spoke to. Not maintaining ground cover, we know, is disastrous. This photo of the dust storm about to descend on a farm at Cunnamulla is horrific. And not all loss of ground cover is quite as sensational as that. However, it was pointed out to me that as well as losing valuable topsoil, as well as making a terrible mess inside the house, as well as all that, kilometres and kilometres away, where that dust lands, it destroys the pasture and destroys grasses and other vegetation. In other words, it travels along and makes pasture in the distance unpalatable. So it has a far-reaching effect when it lands. So there are many, many reasons for maintaining ground cover. Various ways of doing it were pointed out to me. One of them, these images are from a farm at Burrawa, a regenerative farmer, and the message from him and from many others was to be very careful to match stock to the feed available. So here he is assessing the feed in the paddock when he's about to turn in the stock. That's on the left. On the right-hand side, he's moving the stock out of one paddock which has been had very dense stocking rate for about a day. He's moving it out of that paddock into this paddock with the feed. He's assessed that the feed is suitable and he can move the stock through. Here we have on the left-hand side a place at Brewarrina, mainly saltbush, and on the right-hand side a farm at Malali. Both these farmers look very carefully at the pasture available, the feed available, and match their stock accordingly. As you can see, they're very, very different locations and they have different types of feed available, but they assess them in the same way. They're very careful about their assessment and how much stock they can have. So the Brewarrina one on the left, we have an image of the saltbush that has been grazed, the stock have been taken off, and now it's being left to regenerate. On the right-hand side, we have the paddock where the saltbush is ready for grazing. So these people know their industry, they know their plants, they know their farm, they know their farm ecology, and they can match their stocking rates. As Terry McCosker said yesterday, they have to be aware of the grazing capacity of the stocking rate that's suitable for various pastures and various locations. They're not the same everywhere. The carrying capacity isn't the same everywhere, but people who understand their carrying capacity and understand what's available can manage to maintain their ground cover. Now, this doesn't look like much ground cover here, but these farmers are maintaining ground cover by having dedicated paddocks. Sometimes they're called drought paddocks, sometimes they're called sacrifice paddocks. The one on the left is from Walgett, and here he's feeding out in a paddock that he knows is devoid of any ground cover. But he's maintaining ground cover in the rest of his property by concentrating the stock here. He's decided to feed them. It's worked out financially. It's a good idea. That's all important part of the process. But he made this drop himself, and he found that it's better to put the feed into a trough like that rather than put it on the ground. If it's put on the ground, a whole lot gets lost, trampled in. That's a better way to maintain the feed and keep it in good condition. And then, of course, he's keeping all the stock in that paddock. The other thing about this one and the one on the left and the one on the right, they're both fairly close to where the feed is kept and both fairly close to the house. So there's not a lot of travelling involved in moving the feed and not a lot of travelling involved to get to see how the stock are going. The one on the right from Warren is feeding sheep. And so these sheep, these merinos, are being fed in these special feeding areas with shelter from the sun. And you can see there that the paddock that they're feeding on has no ground cover. But this is to maintain the ground cover in the rest of the property. So embryo transfer. A lot of people are concerned about reducing stocking rates, reducing their stock, ending up with no stock, especially people who are keen to keep their genetics in line. This farmer is from Goodoga, and he's managing to keep his genetics with embryo transfer. He has his best stock. He's at Goodoga. He has his best stock at Moama, the other end of the state, where there's, or the other end of the other state, where there's a specialist vet who manages to harvest embryos from stud stock that are kept at Moama. And then when the embryos are at the right stage, they're harvested. They're kept in liquid nitrogen until back at Goodoga, there's enough grass for young ones to feed on. Back at Goodoga are the surrogate mothers, not the stud stock mothers, but surrogate mothers. So at the right time, the embryos are transferred back to Goodoga and implanted into the surrogate mothers when the grass is there, when the feed is there, so that the young ones, the stud parents, are then dropped onto the fertile pasture. So that's one way of keeping the genetics, because a lot of people are very anxious about losing their stud stock, losing their genetics, although I did hear one quote from a shearer who said that everywhere he went, people thought they had the best genetics. They were all worried about losing their genetics. But they said that everywhere, and he said some of them weren't very good at all. So people can have the wrong idea about just how good their genetics is. However, this embryo transfer is working very well for this farmer all the way in Goodoga, so he has his good stock up there in Goodoga. Now, the next point about keeping ground cover related to national resource management, we come to the kangaroos. Now, here they are looking quite cute and friendly and quite nice for a postcard, maybe one I could send overseas somewhere or something like that. But in the next two slides, you'll see, I hope you can see, it's not that easy to see them, but I hope you can see in the next two slides some images that were taken from a farmer while he was sitting in his car looking across his paddocks. He's from up near Cameron's Corner, way up between Tibooburra and Cameron's Corner, and you may see there the roos. He's sitting there. This is before the drought has really hit hard. There's still a lot of green there. You saw these roos coming in their numbers like this and coming in their numbers like this. He just grabbed his phone and took a few photos and made a little video. Because I couldn't use video in this presentation, I've just taken these slides from it. And I hope you can see it, because I know on my own screen, it looks so, the picture was so small I could hardly see them. When it's big, you can see them okay. So that's the problem. So you can hear more about all these farmers. Right, you can hear from them. From case studies on YouTube. We made some YouTube videos of what the farmers said, more than the ones that I've just shown you, a whole lot more, in fact. So you can see them speaking about what they've done, how they prepare for drought. They all said that the time to prepare for drought is before the drought comes. They all said, have a plan. Have a plan. Because hope never fed a beast. That's what one said to me. Hope never fed a beast. So have a plan. And then when the dry time comes, instead of worrying and being anxious and feeling hopeless, you can then at least execute the plan, doing something positive. We worked out what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And you can find out all their stories, more about their stories and more about what they said on all those initial themes in this book, Preparing for Drought, What the Farmers Say. The underlying message, maintain ground cover. But of course, there's a lot more to it than that.
Thanks, Jennifer, for that very interesting presentation. Jennifer, we've got a couple of, we've got one question that came in and a comment. The question I think you've pretty much answered. It was from Bruce Tran: how do farmers manage ground cover on farm against grazing pressures from native animals such as kangaroos? Are you happy you've kind of covered that in that, like that last couple of slides there?
To go back, yeah. Oops. That one?
Yep.
Well, there's a problem. A lot of it is community attitude to what we might euphemistically call harvesting the ruse. So there's a lot to do with community attitude to that. I think it's important that people who aren't involved as much as he is realise that it is important to harvest the ruse when a drought looks like it might be coming. There was a very good presentation at the Rangelands conference I went to in Canberra a couple of years ago about harvesting the ruse and the problems there are, and the fact that it's a shame if they're harvested and nothing happens. It's best if they're harvested by professional shooters and then the meat can be used domestically. It could also be exported, but some of the overseas markets put an embargo on it, mainly because they had consumers that didn't understand what was happening. Another idea is exclusion fencing. Exclusion fencing has been another idea where a whole group of properties come together to, they have a wide area, but they, around a lot of large properties, but they build an exclusion fence to keep out ruse. Yeah, it's expensive, but the people I spoke to said it was well worthwhile.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you actually have that the rainfalls coming in, obviously you have the population explosions of the ruse as well, so it must be a bit of a balancing act across the board.
Yes, it's a balancing act, but the farmers who know there are too many ruse in this sort of time, they're also very sympathetic to the ruse, and they don't want to see them extinct, and they don't want to see them suffer either. And some of them told me about driving, for example, from Packsaddle to Broken Hill, one woman told me, and she was driving from Packsaddle to Broken Hill during the day, and there was so many roos on the road, stunned, like demented because they were starving, I guess, and dehydrated, that she had to just drive around them like statues. Yeah. And I also saw them when I was travelling. I saw them on the road sometimes, just sitting on the road, not even moving when the car came near them because they're in such a poor state. Farmers don't want to see them like that. In fact, sometimes when they see them lying down and nearly dying, they shoot them then because they're suffering.
We've got a comment here from Jeff Minchin. He says, sounds like the efforts to promote and educate managers on containment feeding for the last two big droughts has had some impact, and the ongoing efforts around ground cover management. Do you have any comments around that comment?
Yes, the people I saw, yes, it did have an impact on having these special properties, especially dedicated to feeding and the thought given to feeding. But of course, into that too came the financial consideration of how long, this is part of the planning actually, to decide if there is a drought or we think there's going to be a drought or it's looking like, what is our plan? Will we destock? If so, how many? How many will we keep? If we keep them, For how long will we keep them? How much can we afford to feed them? Work out the cost of feeding against the cost of selling. In the last drought, people were getting very good prices when they sold their stock. So it really made sense to sell for the domestic market rather than feed in many cases.
Yeah, we saw some great presentations yesterday regarding maintaining ground cover and different opportunities around that as well. Got a few more questions coming in here. Got a question here from Thomas Bell. Are the cattle eating all the roo grass, or are the roos eating all the cattle grass? How do we get the right balance?
That's a good question. That's a good question. And years ago, a farmer at Walgett told me that the roos weren't eating the sheep grass, that the roos weren't eating it, and in fact they were compatible. But that wasn't in a drought. That was in a normal Walgett time, whatever normal is. But anyway, a good normal time, right? So I guess that's for the scientists to answer that question. That's for the scientists. But the farmers, the producers, notice that after the roos have been through, such as in this slide, there's nothing left.
Yeah, I've heard that quite a lot too. Got another question here from an anonymous delegate. Any insights on water supply preparation? Our last dry, we had plenty of ground cover and feed, but no water in dams, which was a huge challenge.
Yes, I noticed that a lot of the people that I interviewed had accessed the FIF funding, Farm Infrastructure Funding, Commonwealth Government funding, which was a loan at a very low rate and payable back over 20 years. And a lot of people had already accessed that funding to improve their dam sizes, to increase their dam capacity, and to clean out dams. That was another big thing, to clean out the dams in the dry time so that when it rained again, they would actually be able to fill. So yes, attending to the water supply, especially accessing that FIF funding, seemed to be very beneficial for the people who'd accessed it.
And do you recommend fencing around dams?
Yes, I do. I don't know if everyone agrees with me, but I do, yes.
I was going to say,
Yes.
because one of the questions is fencing around dams, etc., to keep roos away from the permanent water sources.
Well, it also keeps the stock away, and so you're not so likely to foul the dam if you can pump the water out of the dam to a trough. But keeping the roos away, yeah.
You there, Jennifer? It seems like you've gone still.
That's true too, yes.
Sorry, Jennifer, we lost you there for
I'm
about
not sure
10.
how much damage they did in that regard, but I'm here.
Yeah, the connection seems a little bit in and out at the
It
moment.
just said my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah. Look, Jennifer, it sounds like the internet connection
It's a bit wonky.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
sounds like it is.
I noticed that.
Look, we have reached all the end of the questions. So what we might do is might wrap it up. Just while we wrap it up, could you put your last slide up again? No? Oh, sorry, we haven't got time for that. Sorry, guys. So we might wrap it up, guys. Jennifer's details will be available after the conference, so you can actually get in contact with Jennifer through those details. We might wrap it up here. Give me one moment. Okay, we're going to have a 4-minute break, guys, and thanks again to Jennifer for her presentation. We'll be back in 4 minutes.